The maintenance room was quiet except for the soft clicking sounds of metal pieces being cleaned and checked. Sarah Rodriguez sat at the long wooden table, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, small hands working carefully on her rifle. Around her, other soldiers did the same work, each focused on their own weapons. The room smelled of gun oil and metal polish. Sarah had been doing this same routine for 3 years now. Every Tuesday and Friday, the entire unit would gather here to clean and maintain their equipment. It was not exciting work, but it was important. A dirty weapon could jam at the wrong moment. A loose screw could mean the difference between life and death in combat. She picked up a small brush and began cleaning the barrel of her M4 carbine. The bristles made tiny scratching sounds as they removed dirt and residue. Sarah had learned to love these quiet moments. In a military base where everything was loud and urgent, this peaceful time felt like a gift. "Rodriguez, your weapon looks cleaner than the day it was made," said Marcus, the soldier sitting next to her. He was a tall man from Texas with a friendly smile. "You've been working on that same part for 20 minutes. Sarah looked up and smiled. "Better safe than sorry. My father always told me to take care of my tools, and they'll take care of me." Marcus nodded. He knew about Sarah's father. Everyone in the unit did. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez had been killed in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Sarah had joined the military to honor his memory. She carried his dog tags in her pocket every day. The maintenance room was in the basement of Building C at Fort Carson, Colorado. Large fluorescent lights hung from the ceiling, casting bright white light over everything. The walls were painted army green, and motivational posters hung here and there. One poster showed a soldier helping another soldier and read "Leave no one behind." Sarah finished cleaning the barrel and moved on to checking the trigger mechanism. Her movements were smooth and practiced. She had done this so many times that her hands seemed to know what to do without her brain telling them. Click, check, clean, repeat. Other soldiers talked quietly while they worked. Some discussed weekend plans. Others complained about the food in the mess hall. A few argued about which football team would win the upcoming game. But Sarah mostly stayed quiet. She preferred to listen rather than talk. The door to the maintenance room was heavy and metal. When someone opened it, cold air would rush in from the hallway outside. The heating system in the basement was not very good, so everyone wore their jackets while working. Sarah's jacket had her name tape sewn on the front, Rodriguez. Below that was her rank, Private First Class. She had been promoted to PFC 6 months ago. It was not a high rank, but Sarah was proud of it. She had worked hard to earn the respect of her superiors. She always followed orders exactly. She never complained about difficult assignments. She helped other soldiers when they struggled with their work. "Hey Sarah," called out Jennifer, a young woman from Michigan who had joined the unit 2 months ago. "Can you help me with this scope? I can't get it to adjust properly." Sarah set down her cleaning cloth and walked over to Jennifer's table. The scope was slightly loose, causing the crosshairs to be off-center. Sarah showed Jennifer how to tighten the mounting rings without over-tightening them. "See? Just snug, not tight. If you make it too tight, you might damage the scope," Sarah explained patiently. "Thanks, Rodriguez. You're a lifesaver," Jennifer said gratefully. Sarah returned to her own work. This was how she had built her reputation in the unit. Always helpful, never showing off, just quietly competent. Her squad leader, Sergeant Williams, often said that Sarah was the kind of soldier every unit needed. The maintenance room had 24 tables arranged in 4 rows. Each table could seat 6 soldiers. Today, about 60 people were present, which was typical for a maintenance session. The room could hold up to 144 soldiers when fully occupied. Sarah's unit was the 1st Battalion, 68th Armor Regiment. They were a tank unit, but every soldier still needed to maintain their personal weapons. Sarah was trained as a tank driver, but she also served as an infantry soldier when needed. The military had taught her many skills, how to drive different vehicles, how to operate radio equipment, how to provide first aid, and how to fight in various combat situations. As she worked, Sarah thought about her family back home in New Mexico. Her mother, Elena, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Her younger brother, Carlos, was finishing his last year of high school. He wanted to join the military too, but Sarah had convinced him to go to college first. Education is important, Mijo, she had told him during her last leave. The military will always be here if you decide you want it later. Her mother worried about her constantly. Elena called every Sunday, and the conversations always included warnings to be careful and prayers for Sarah's safety. Sarah understood her mother's fear. Losing her husband to war had been devastating. The thought of losing her daughter too was almost unbearable. But Sarah felt called to serve. It was not just about honoring her father's memory, though that was part of it. She genuinely believed in the mission of protecting her country and helping people around the world. She had seen the good that American soldiers could do when she deployed to Eastern Europe last year. They had helped distribute food and medical supplies to refugees. The clock on the wall showed 14:30 hours. They had been working for 90 minutes, with about 30 minutes left in the maintenance session. Sarah's weapon was nearly perfect now. Every part had been cleaned, checked, and properly lubricated. She began the final assembly process. First, she inserted the bolt carrier group back into the upper receiver. Then, she installed the charging handle. Next came the buffer spring and buffer into the lower receiver. She connected the upper and lower receivers with the takedown pins. Finally, she inserted a magazine and performed a function check. The weapon operated smoothly. Sarah smiled with satisfaction. This rifle might save her life someday, or the life of a fellow soldier. Taking care of it was more than just following orders, it was a sacred responsibility. Around her, other soldiers were finishing their work too. The room began to fill with the sounds of weapons being assembled and function checked. Click-clack, as charging handles were operated and triggers pulled. It was like a mechanical symphony. Sergeant Williams walked between the tables, checking everyone's progress. He was a career soldier with 18 years of service. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. He had served with Sarah's father in Iraq and had personally recommended Sarah for promotion. "Looking good, Rodriguez," he said as he examined her weapon. "Your father would be proud." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Sergeant Williams did not give compliments lightly. Coming from him, those words meant everything. She began cleaning her work area, putting tools back in their proper places. Organization was another military value that had been drilled into her from day one. Everything had a place, and everything should be in its place. A messy workspace could lead to lost equipment or forgotten tasks. The other soldiers at her table were finishing up too. Marcus was having trouble with his sling attachment, and Sarah helped him get it properly adjusted. Jennifer was carefully applying a light coat of oil to her weapon's moving parts. Two soldiers she did not know very well, Thompson and Garcia, were discussing their plans for the 3-day weekend coming up. "I'm driving back to Denver to see my girlfriend," Thompson was saying. "Haven't seen her in 6 weeks." "That's rough, man," Garcia replied. "I'm just going to sleep and play video games. Maybe go fishing if the weather's nice." Sarah listened but did not join the conversation. She had no special plans for the weekend. She would probably go for a long run, read a book, and call her family. Simple pleasures had become more meaningful to her since joining the military. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. One of them flickered occasionally, casting brief shadows across the room. Sarah made a mental note to report it to the maintenance staff. Small problems could become big problems if ignored. She thought about the training exercise scheduled for next week. Her unit would be practicing urban combat scenarios at a training facility in California. It would be hot, dusty, and exhausting work. But Sarah looked forward to it. Training kept her skills sharp and her mind focused. The military had changed her in many ways. Before enlisting, she had been shy and unsure of herself. Now she felt confident and capable. She had learned that she could handle much more stress and hardship than she had ever imagined. She had discovered inner strength she never knew existed. Her weapon was now completely clean and properly assembled. Sarah held it up to the light, checking for any spots she might have missed. Everything looked perfect. She set it down carefully in the rack beside her table and began organizing her cleaning supplies. The room was starting to empty as soldiers finished their work and prepared to leave. Some would head to the gym for physical training. Others would return to their barracks to rest or study. A few had duty assignments that would keep them busy until evening. Sarah packed her cleaning kit methodically. Each brush, cloth, and bottle went into its designated spot. She had learned this system during basic training and had perfected it over 3 years of use. Everything fit together like puzzle pieces. As she worked, she noticed a new soldier struggling with his weapon at the next table. He looked young and nervous, probably fresh out of basic training. Sarah remembered feeling the same way during her first maintenance session. Everything had seemed so important and intimidating. "Need any help?" she asked quietly. The young soldier looked up gratefully. "Yes, ma'am. I can't get this spring to go back in the right way." Sarah showed him the proper technique for installing the buffer spring. It required a specific angle and gentle pressure. Too much force would damage the parts, but too little would not seat them properly. "There you go," she said as the spring clicked into place. "Just remember, firm but gentle. Like everything else in the military." The young soldier smiled. "Thank you, PFC Rodriguez. I really appreciate it." Sarah felt good about helping him. She remembered how grateful she had been when more experienced soldiers helped her learn. Passing on knowledge and skills was an important part of military culture. The clock now showed 14:50 hours. 10 minutes until the official end of the maintenance session. Sarah had finished all her required tasks and helped 2 other soldiers with theirs. It had been a productive afternoon. She looked around the room one more time. In just over an hour, this space had been transformed from chaotic activity to organized completion. 60 soldiers had each completely disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled their weapons. It was an impressive display of training and discipline. Sarah stood up and stretched her back. Sitting hunched over a table for 90 minutes always made her muscles tight. She would definitely need to do some stretching exercises later. Physical fitness was crucial for soldiers, and Sarah worked hard to stay in excellent condition. She had run a 6-minute mile last month during the unit's fitness test. It was not the fastest time in the company, but it was a personal best for her. Sarah was naturally built more for endurance than speed, but she had been working with a trainer to improve her sprinting ability. The maintenance room was nearly empty now. Only about 15 soldiers remained, mostly those who had encountered problems with their weapons that required extra attention. Sarah was proud to be among the first finished. It showed that her skills and efficiency were improving. She slung her clean weapon over her shoulder and picked up her cleaning kit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But, for now, she felt satisfied with a job well done. Her father had always said that taking pride in your work, no matter how small, was the mark of a good person. As Sarah walked toward the door, she thought about the call sign that had been assigned to her last month. Every soldier in a combat unit received a radio call sign for use during operations. Hers was Eagle 7. She had been honored to receive it, as Eagle call signs were usually reserved for experienced and reliable soldiers. The heavy metal door opened with a slight screech. Cold air rushed in from the hallway, making Sarah zip up her jacket. Outside, she could hear the sounds of military life continuing, vehicles driving by, soldiers calling to each other, the distant sound of training exercises. Sarah paused for a moment in the doorway and looked back at the maintenance room. It was empty now except for the tables and chairs, waiting for the next scheduled session. But she knew she would be back here again in just 3 days, continuing the never-ending cycle of caring for her equipment. She stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind her with a solid thunk. Her boots echoed on the polished concrete floor as she walked toward the stairs that would take her back up to ground level. Another maintenance session complete, another step toward becoming the soldier her father would have wanted her to be. The mess hall buzzed with the usual dinner conversation as Sarah sat with her squad mates, picking at her meatloaf and mashed potatoes. The food was not terrible, but it was not great either. Military cooks did their best with what they had, but feeding hundreds of soldiers every day was more about nutrition than flavor. "Did you guys hear about the new assignment coming up?" Marcus asked, lowering his voice slightly. "Williams mentioned something about a special operation during the briefing yesterday." Jennifer leaned forward, interested. "What kind of special operation? Are we deploying again?" Sarah listened while continuing to eat. Rumors and speculation were constant in military life. Most of the time they turned out to be wrong or greatly exaggerated. She had learned not to get too excited or worried about unofficial information. "Nobody knows for sure," Marcus continued. "But I heard it involves working with some high-ranking officers from the Pentagon. Could be big." Thompson, who had joined their table a few minutes earlier, shook his head. "My cousin is stationed at the Pentagon. He says they're always sending people out for training exercises that they make sound more important than they really are." Sarah finished her dinner and stood up to return her tray. The mess hall was loud with the sounds of hundreds of conversations, chairs scraping against the floor, and kitchen staff cleaning dishes. Large windows along one wall showed the evening sky outside, painted orange and pink by the setting sun. As she walked toward the tray return area, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Colonel Harrison sitting at the officers' table near the front of the hall. He was deep in conversation with several other senior officers she did not recognize. Their discussion looked serious and formal. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was the battalion commander, a man in his early 40s with graying hair and sharp intelligence behind his brown eyes. Sarah had only spoken with him twice in her 3 years of service, both times during formal ceremonies. He seemed fair but demanding, the kind of leader who expected excellence from everyone under his command. After returning her tray, Sarah walked back through the mess hall toward the exit. She noticed that the conversation at the officers' table had grown more intense. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was pointing at some papers spread across the table while one of the unknown officers nodded grimly. Outside, the evening air was cool and fresh compared to the warm, food-scented atmosphere of the mess hall. Sarah decided to take a longer route back to her barracks, wanting to enjoy the pleasant weather and clear her head before spending the evening studying for her upcoming promotion exam. Fort Carson was beautiful in the early evening light. The Rocky Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even though it was late spring. The base itself was laid out in a neat grid pattern, with well-maintained roads connecting various buildings and training areas. Sarah passed the motor pool where mechanics were performing evening maintenance on the unit's vehicles. The sound of tools and machinery created a steady background noise. She could see several M1 Abrams tanks lined up in perfect rows, their massive bulk impressive even when motionless. She had learned to drive those tanks during her advanced training. The first time she had climbed into the driver's seat, she had been overwhelmed by the complexity of controls and instruments. But, with practice and excellent instruction, she had mastered the skills needed to operate the 70-ton machine effectively. Tank driving required a unique combination of technical knowledge, physical coordination, and mental focus. The driver had to monitor multiple systems simultaneously while navigating terrain and following orders from the tank commander. It was challenging work, but Sarah had discovered she had a natural talent for it. As she continued her walk, Sarah passed the base library. Through the windows, she could see several soldiers studying at tables inside. The military placed great emphasis on continuing education, and many soldiers used their off-duty time to work on college degrees or professional certifications. Sarah herself was taking online courses toward a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. She attended classes 2 evenings per week and spent most weekends working on assignments. The coursework was difficult, especially while maintaining her full-time military duties, but she was determined to finish. Her father had never had the opportunity to go to college. He had enlisted straight out of high school and spent his entire adult life in the military. But he had always encouraged Sarah to get an education, telling her that knowledge was the one thing nobody could ever take away from her. The base gym was still busy with soldiers working out. Through the glass doors, Sarah could see people running on treadmills, lifting weights, and participating in group fitness classes. Physical fitness was not optional in the military, it was a requirement that could affect promotion opportunities and career advancement. Sarah had already completed her workout earlier that morning. She preferred exercising before breakfast, finding that it gave her energy for the entire day. Her routine included 3 miles of running, followed by strength training focused on functional movements that would help her perform her job better. She turned down a side street that led toward the barracks complex where she lived. The buildings were 3 stories tall and constructed of red brick, giving them a somewhat institutional appearance. Each building housed about 100 soldiers in shared rooms. Sarah's room was on the 2nd floor, which she shared with Jennifer. They had been roommates for 8 months now and got along well. Jennifer was neat and quiet, qualities that Sarah appreciated. Some soldiers complained about having to share living space, but Sarah actually enjoyed having a roommate. It provided companionship and someone to talk with during the evening hours. As she walked, Sarah thought about the conversation she had overheard at dinner regarding the upcoming special assignment. In her experience, such rumors usually meant one of 3 things: a training exercise, a temporary assignment to help another unit, or actual deployment to an overseas location. She hoped it would not be a deployment. Sarah had completed one overseas tour already and was scheduled for at least another year of stateside duty. She enjoyed the stability of being in one place and having regular contact with her family. Deployments meant months of separation and constant worry for her mother. But if the military needed her to deploy, she would go without complaint. That was what she had signed up for when she took her oath of enlistment. The needs of the service always came first, and personal preferences were secondary considerations. The evening was quiet except for the usual sounds of base life, vehicles driving by, soldiers talking as they walked to various destinations, and the distant sound of a training exercise taking place at the far end of the base. Sarah had grown to love these peaceful moments when the intensity of military life temporarily relaxed. She passed the base exchange, which was still open for another hour. The BX, as everyone called it, was like a small department store that sold everything from uniforms to electronics to snacks. Sarah needed to buy some new running shoes soon, as her current pair was starting to show significant wear. A group of young soldiers walked by, heading toward the recreation center. They were laughing and joking with each other, clearly enjoying their off-duty time. Sarah remembered being that carefree during her first year of service. Military life had seemed like an exciting adventure then, full of new experiences and opportunities. Now, 3 years later, she had a more mature understanding of what military service really meant. It was not always exciting or adventurous. Much of it was routine work, following orders, and maintaining discipline. But it was also meaningful work that served a purpose larger than herself. Sarah reached her barracks building and used her key card to enter through the main door. The lobby was empty except for the charge of quarters desk, where Corporal Martinez was reading a book while monitoring the building's security. "Evening, Rodriguez," he said without looking up from his book. "Good evening, Corporal," Sarah replied as she headed for the stairs. The 2nd floor hallway was quiet. Most soldiers were either still at dinner, working out, or attending evening activities. Sarah unlocked the door to her room and stepped inside, grateful for a few minutes of privacy and quiet. The room was small but functional. 2 single beds, 2 desks, 2 small wardrobes, and 1 window that looked out toward the mountains. Sarah and Jennifer had decorated it with a few personal touches, family photos, a small plant that Jennifer grew in the windowsill, and motivational posters that inspired them both. Sarah sat down at her desk and opened her study materials for the promotion exam. The test covered military history, regulations, leadership principles, and technical knowledge related to her military occupation specialty. She had been studying for 6 weeks and felt confident about most of the material. The promotion from private first class to specialist would mean increased responsibility, slightly higher pay, and recognition of her growing competence as a soldier. More importantly to Sarah, it would be another step toward becoming the kind of non-commissioned officer who could effectively lead and mentor younger soldiers. She opened her notebook and began reviewing her notes on military leadership principles. The Army had identified several core attributes and competencies that effective leaders needed to develop: integrity, empathy, warrior ethos, and the ability to influence others toward achieving common goals. As she studied, Sarah thought about the leaders who had influenced her own development. Sergeant Williams had taught her the importance of taking care of soldiers while maintaining high standards. Lieutenant Garcia had shown her how to balance compassion with firmness when dealing with disciplinary issues. Her father had been the most influential leader in her life, even though she had never served directly under his command. Through his example and guidance, he had taught her that leadership was about service to others, not personal advancement or glory. The door opened quietly, and Jennifer entered carrying her own study materials. "How was dinner?" Jennifer asked as she settled at her own desk. "The usual," Sarah replied. Marcus was spreading rumors about some special assignment coming up. Jennifer groaned. "I swear he gets half his information from fantasy novels. Remember when he was convinced we were all going to be sent to Antarctica for cold weather training?" Sarah laughed. "That was pretty ridiculous. Though I have to admit, the idea of seeing penguins was kind of appealing." They studied in comfortable silence for the next hour. Jennifer was preparing for her own advancement, working toward the rank of private first class. She had been in the military for only 10 months but was progressing well and showed strong potential for future leadership positions. At 2100 hours, Sarah closed her study materials and began preparing for bed. Military life required early mornings, so most soldiers tried to get adequate sleep whenever possible. She had learned that being tired could affect performance, decision-making, and safety. As she changed into her sleep clothes, Sarah thought about calling her family. But it was already late in New Mexico, and she did not want to wake anyone. She would call tomorrow evening instead, during the time when her mother was usually finishing dinner and her brother was working on homework. Jennifer was also getting ready for bed. They had developed a routine over their months as roommates that allowed them to share the small space efficiently. Jennifer used the bathroom first while Sarah organized her uniform for the next day, then they switched. "Sarah," Jennifer said quietly as she brushed her teeth, "do you ever wonder what you would be doing if you had not joined the military?" It was an interesting question. Sarah had sometimes thought about alternative paths her life might have taken. She probably would have gone to college right after high school, maybe studied engineering or education. She might have gotten married young and started a family, like many of her friends from high school had done. Sometimes, Sarah answered honestly. "But I can't imagine being anyone else now. The military has made me who I am." "I feel the same way," Jennifer said. "My parents still ask when I'm going to come home and get a real job, but this is my real job. It's my real life." Sarah understood that sentiment completely. Civilian friends and family members often had difficulty understanding why someone would choose military life. They saw only the challenges and restrictions, not the sense of purpose and belonging that came with serving something larger than yourself. After Jennifer finished in the bathroom, Sarah took her turn brushing her teeth and washing her face. The mirror reflected back a young woman who looked more confident and capable than the uncertain girl who had arrived at basic training 3 years ago. Military life had been transformational for Sarah in ways she was still discovering. She had learned skills she never would have acquired in civilian life. She had traveled to places she never would have seen. She had developed friendships based on shared challenges and mutual dependence that were deeper than most civilian relationships. But, perhaps most importantly, she had learned that she was capable of much more than she had ever believed possible. The military had pushed her beyond what she thought were her limits and shown her that those limits existed mostly in her mind. Sarah returned to her bed and set her alarm clock for 5:30 hours. Tomorrow would bring physical training, followed by a day of classes on advanced tank maintenance procedures. In the evening, she planned to continue studying for her promotion exam. As she lay in the darkness listening to Jennifer's quiet breathing from the other bed, Sarah felt grateful for the life she had chosen. It was not always easy, and it required sacrifices that most people would find difficult. But it was a good life, filled with purpose and meaning. She thought about her father, as she did every night before falling asleep. She wondered if he was proud of the woman she had become. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, he knew that his daughter was carrying on his legacy of service and honor. The base was quiet now except for the occasional sound of a vehicle passing by or security personnel making their rounds. Sarah closed her eyes and let the familiar sounds of military life lull her toward sleep, unaware that tomorrow would bring changes that would test everything she had learned about being a soldier. The alarm clock rang at exactly 5:30 hours, piercing through Sarah's deep sleep like a sharp blade. She had been dreaming about home, about sitting on her mother's porch and watching the sunset over the New Mexico desert. The transition from peaceful dreams to military reality was always jarring, but Sarah had learned to make it quickly. She rolled out of bed immediately, her feet hitting the cold floor with practiced silence. Jennifer was already moving in the other bed, both of them following the disciplined routine they had developed over months of shared living. No words were necessary, they both knew exactly what needed to be done and how much time they had to do it. Sarah pulled on her physical training uniform, gray shorts, black t-shirt with Army printed across the front, and running shoes that had seen hundreds of miles. The PT uniform was designed for functionality rather than fashion, but Sarah had grown to associate it with some of her favorite parts of military life. Physical training was scheduled to begin at 6 o'clock hours, which gave them 25 minutes to get dressed, make their beds to inspection standards, and walk to the formation area. It was enough time if they moved efficiently, but not enough for delays or mistakes. Sarah's bed-making technique had been perfected through 3 years of practice and occasional failures that resulted in having to redo the work. The sheets had to be pulled tight enough to bounce a quarter, the blanket folded at precise angles, and the pillow positioned exactly in the center. Military attention to detail extended to every aspect of life, no matter how seemingly insignificant. Jennifer finished first and headed to the bathroom while Sarah completed her bed and laid out her duty uniform for after PT. The ACU's Army combat uniforms needed to be arranged in the exact sequence she would put them on later. Efficiency was crucial when you had only a few minutes to shower and change after physical training. The hallway was already busy with soldiers moving purposefully toward their various destinations. Some were heading to the dining facility for a quick breakfast before formation. Others, like Sarah and Jennifer, were going directly to PT and would eat afterward. The choice depended on personal preference and individual metabolism. Sarah preferred exercising on an empty stomach. She had discovered that eating before physical training made her feel sluggish and sometimes caused stomach cramps during intense activity. A light breakfast after PT provided better energy for the rest of the day's activities. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clear. Stars were still visible in the sky, though the eastern horizon showed the first faint hints of dawn. Mountain air had a quality that Sarah found invigorating, clean and thin, with a sharpness that seemed to clear her mind and energize her body. The formation area was a large paved space adjacent to the main physical training field. Soldiers were already gathering in their assigned positions, creating neat rows based on unit organization. Each person had a specific place in formation, and everyone was expected to know exactly where they belonged. Sarah took her position in the second row, third from the left. Jennifer's spot was one row back and 2 positions over, placing them close enough to see each other but not adjacent. The formation structure was designed for accountability and efficient communication of information to large groups. First Sergeant Davis arrived precisely at 5:58 hours and took his position at the front of the formation. He was a tall, lean man in his mid-40s who had earned his soldiers' respect through consistent fairness and genuine concern for their welfare. His voice could carry across the formation without electronic amplification, a skill developed through years of practice. "Formation, attention," he commanded, and hundreds of soldiers snapped to the position of attention simultaneously. The sound of boot heels clicking together echoed across the area like a single, sharp crack. "Good morning, soldiers," First Sergeant Davis called out.
Good morning, First Sergeant, the formation responded in unison.
Sarah felt the familiar surge of pride that came from being part of something larger than herself. The collective response of hundreds of voices speaking as one always reminded her of the unity and shared purpose that defined military service. Today we're going to focus on combat readiness conditioning, First Sergeant Davis announced. That means we're going to work on the physical skills that could save your life in a real-world situation. This is not just exercise, this is training for survival. The formation moved as one unit toward the PT field, maintaining their organized structure as they transitioned from the paved area to the grass. The field was approximately the size of 2 football fields, with various exercise stations set up around the perimeter and obstacles placed throughout the center. Sarah's squad was assigned to begin at the agility course, a series of obstacles designed to simulate combat situations where soldiers might need to move quickly through confined spaces, over barriers, or around hazardous areas. The course included low crawls under wire, high steps over walls, zigzag runs through cones, and balance challenges on narrow beams. Sergeant Williams gathered his squad around him for specific instructions. The goal here is not just speed, he explained. In combat, you need to move quickly while maintaining control and awareness of your surroundings. I want to see smooth movements, not frantic rushing. Sarah lined up behind Marcus for her first run through the course. She watched carefully as he navigated each obstacle, noting where he moved efficiently and where he seemed to struggle. Learning from others' experiences was a valuable military skill that could be applied to any situation. When her turn came, Sarah approached the first obstacle, a series of tires laid flat on the ground that required high knee stepping. She had learned to pump her arms rhythmically while lifting her knees to waist level with each step. The key was maintaining a steady pace rather than trying to rush through. The low crawl section came next, requiring her to get on her hands and knees and move forward while staying below a grid of ropes stretched 2 feet above the ground. Sarah had initially found this exercise difficult and exhausting, but she had developed a technique that used her core muscles efficiently and kept her moving steadily forward. After the crawl came a series of 6-foot-tall walls that had to be climbed over. Sarah grabbed the top of the wall and pulled herself up while using her feet to walk up the wooden surface. At the top, she swung one leg over and lowered herself down the other side, trying to land softly to avoid jarring her knees. The zigzag run required quick changes of direction around orange cones spaced 15 feet apart. Sarah had learned to lean into each turn and use her inside leg as a pivot point, allowing her to change direction efficiently without losing speed.
This skill could be crucial in combat situations where soldiers needed to move unpredictably to avoid enemy fire.
The final obstacle was a balance beam 8 inches wide and 20 feet long, elevated 3 feet off the ground. Sarah stepped onto the beam and focused her eyes on the far end rather than looking down at her feet. She had learned that maintaining visual focus on the destination helped with balance and confidence. She completed the course in 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which was 7 seconds better than her previous best time. Sarah felt satisfied with her improvement but knew she could still do better with more practice. "Good work, Rodriguez," Sergeant Williams said as she finished.
"Your form is getting much smoother.
Keep working on the transition between obstacles, that's where you can save the most time." Sarah nodded and moved to the back of the line to wait for her second run through the course. The squad would complete the agility training 3 times before rotating to the next station. Repetition was essential for developing muscle memory and improving performance under stress. While waiting, Sarah watched the other soldiers in her squad navigate the course. She noticed that Jennifer was struggling with the wall climb and made a mental note to offer some coaching later. Helping fellow soldiers improve their performance was both a military duty and a way of strengthening the overall unit. Thompson had excellent speed but sometimes sacrificed control for quickness, causing him to stumble or take inefficient paths around obstacles. Garcia showed good technique but seemed to be holding back, as if he was afraid of pushing himself to maximum effort. The second rotation through the agility course went even better for Sarah. She improved her time by another 4 seconds and felt more confident with each obstacle. The key was trusting her training and not overthinking the movements. When she tried to analyze each step while performing it, she became slower and less coordinated. After agility training, the squad rotated to the strength circuit, which included push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and various functional movements using sandbags and ammunition cans. This station focused on building the kind of practical strength that soldiers needed for their daily duties. Sarah excelled at pull-ups, partly due to her smaller size but mostly because she had worked hard to develop her upper body strength. When she first joined the military, she could barely do 3 pull-ups. Now she could complete 15 with good form, and she was working toward a goal of 20. Push-ups had always been easier for her. She could complete 50 in 2 minutes, which exceeded the standard for her age group. But Sarah never settled for just meeting the standard, she pushed herself to exceed it by a significant margin.
The sandbag exercises were the most challenging part of the strength circuit.
Soldiers had to lift, carry, and move 60-pound sandbags through various patterns that simulated combat tasks like moving wounded soldiers or relocating equipment under fire. The exercises were exhausting but highly relevant to real-world situations. Sarah partnered with Jennifer for the sandbag exercises, and they took turns supporting each other through the demanding movements. Having a good training partner could make the difference between giving up when things got difficult and pushing through to accomplish the mission.
Keep your core tight, Sarah reminded Jennifer as they practiced fireman's carries with the sandbag. Use your legs to lift, not your back.
Jennifer nodded, breathing heavily but maintaining good form. She was much stronger now than when she had first arrived at the unit. Regular training and proper nutrition had transformed her from someone who struggled with basic physical requirements to a capable and confident soldier. The third and final station was cardiovascular endurance, which included a 2-mile run followed by interval sprints. This was Sarah's favorite part of physical training because running gave her time to think and clear her mind while challenging her body. The 2-mile run followed a course that wound through various parts of Fort Carson, including some hills that added difficulty and variety. Sarah settled into a pace that felt sustainable but challenging, fast enough to improve her fitness but not so fast that she would burn out before finishing. Running in formation with her squad created a sense of shared effort and mutual encouragement that Sarah found motivating. When someone started to lag behind, others would offer words of support or adjust their own pace slightly to help the group stay together.
The mountain scenery provided inspiration during difficult moments of the run.
When Sarah felt tired or tempted to slow down, she would look up at the peaks surrounding the base and remind herself that soldiers throughout history had overcome much greater challenges than a 2-mile run. She finished the run in 14 minutes and 22 seconds, which was within her normal range. Sarah was not the fastest runner in her squad, but she was consistent and rarely had bad days that significantly impacted her performance. The interval sprints that followed the run were designed to simulate the kind of intense, short-duration effort that combat situations often required. Soldiers had to be able to sprint to cover, then recover quickly and be ready for the next burst of activity. Sarah completed 4 30-second sprints with 90-second recovery periods between each one. By the 4th sprint, her legs felt heavy and her lungs burned, but she maintained her effort level through sheer determination and mental discipline. Physical training concluded with a group cooldown led by First Sergeant Davis. The entire formation performed stretching exercises designed to prevent injury and promote recovery. Sarah used this time to focus on her breathing and gradually return her heart rate to normal. Outstanding effort this morning, soldiers, First Sergeant Davis announced as PT concluded. You have 30 minutes to shower and change before duty formation. Remember, physical fitness is not just about passing tests. It's about being ready when your country needs you. Sarah and Jennifer walked back toward their barracks building, both tired but satisfied with their morning's work. The sun was now fully above the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. It was going to be a beautiful day. That sandbag exercise kicked my butt, Jennifer said, rolling her shoulders to work out the tension. You did great, Sarah replied. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have been able to finish that circuit at all. You've gotten so much stronger. Jennifer smiled gratefully. Having supportive squad mates made the challenging aspects of military life much more manageable. Sarah had learned that building others up ultimately strengthened the entire unit. They reached their barracks building with 25 minutes remaining before formation. That was enough time for a quick shower and to get into their duty uniforms, but they would need to move efficiently. Sarah had perfected a routine that allowed her to shower, dress, and be ready for formation in 20 minutes if necessary. The hot water felt wonderful on her tired muscles. Sarah let herself enjoy the simple pleasure for a few minutes before focusing on the practical tasks of washing and getting clean. Military life taught you to appreciate small comforts while not becoming dependent on them. As she dried off and began putting on her ACUs, Sarah thought about the day ahead. They had classes scheduled on advanced vehicle maintenance, followed by weapons training at the firing range. Tomorrow would bring field exercises that would test everything they had learned in recent weeks. She was looking forward to the challenges. Each day in the military brought opportunities to learn new skills, test existing abilities, and grow as both a soldier and a person. Sarah had never imagined that she would find such satisfaction in a lifestyle that many people considered rigid and restrictive. But, for her, the structure and purpose of military life provided exactly what she needed to thrive. Clear expectations, meaningful work, and the knowledge that her efforts contributed to something larger than herself, these elements created a sense of fulfillment that Sarah had never experienced in civilian life. She finished dressing with 5 minutes to spare and spent the remaining time ensuring that her appearance met military standards. Every detail had to be perfect, uniform pressed and fitted properly, boots polished to a high shine, hair neatly arranged, and all required items in their designated places. Sarah checked herself in the mirror one final time and felt ready for whatever the day might bring. She was a soldier, trained and prepared to serve her country with honor and distinction. It was a responsibility she carried proudly, knowing that her father would have been proud to see the woman she had become. 3 days after the routine physical training session, Sarah found herself back in the familiar maintenance room, surrounded by the usual sounds of soldiers cleaning their weapons. But today felt different somehow. There was an energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that she could not quite identify. She had noticed unusual activity around the base over the past few days. More high-ranking officers were visible than normal, and several vehicles with government license plates had been parked near the headquarters building. When asked about it, Sergeant Williams had simply said that important visitors were conducting routine inspections. Sarah focused on her weapon maintenance, carefully disassembling her M4 carbine according to the procedures she had memorized long ago. The familiar routine was comforting in its predictability. Take apart, clean each piece, check for wear or damage, reassemble, function test. Simple, methodical, reliable. The maintenance room was fuller than usual today. Normally about 60 soldiers would be present, but Sarah counted at least 80 people working at the various tables. Some faces were unfamiliar, soldiers from other companies who were not usually scheduled for maintenance at the same time as her unit. "Rodriguez, you're making the rest of us look bad," joked Marcus, who was struggling with a stubborn bolt that did not want to come apart properly. "How do you make that look so easy?" Sarah smiled and set down her cleaning rod to help him. The bolt was not stuck, Marcus was just not applying pressure in quite the right direction. She showed him the proper technique, and the part came apart smoothly. "It's all about understanding how the parts want to move," she explained. "Fighting against the design just makes everything harder." This was a lesson Sarah had learned that applied to more than just weapon maintenance. Working with systems rather than against them, whether mechanical or organizational, usually produced better results with less effort. The military had taught her to look for efficient solutions rather than brute force approaches. Jennifer was working quietly at the table behind them, her movements becoming more confident and skilled with each maintenance session. She had progressed remarkably since joining the unit, transforming from someone who needed constant guidance to a soldier who could handle routine tasks independently. The door to the maintenance room opened with its characteristic heavy thunk, and Sarah glanced up to see who was entering. Instead of another soldier arriving late, she saw Lieutenant Colonel Harrison walking into the room, followed by several officers she did not recognize. This was highly unusual. The battalion commander rarely visited maintenance sessions, and, when he did, it was typically announced in advance. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach but continued working on her weapon while keeping one eye on the group of officers. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison moved through the room methodically, stopping at various tables to observe soldiers at work and ask brief questions. His manner was serious but not unfriendly. The unknown officers followed a few steps behind, taking notes on small tablets and occasionally whispering to each other. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she found herself listening to the conversations taking place at nearby tables. The officers were asking questions that seemed routine at first. How long have you been in the unit? What is your primary military occupation? Have you completed any specialized training recently? But then, Sarah heard something that made her pay closer attention. At the table next to theirs, one of the unknown officers was asking Thompson about his experience with communications equipment and whether he had ever worked in high-security environments. These were not routine inspection questions. They sounded more like screening questions for a special assignment or security clearance investigation. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the rumors Marcus had been spreading might actually have some basis in reality. The group of officers was moving closer to their table now. Sarah could see Lieutenant Colonel Harrison more clearly, and she noticed that his uniform bore insignia she had not seen before, small patches that suggested involvement with special operations or intelligence units. Rodriguez, a voice said behind her, and Sarah turned to see Sergeant Williams approaching their table. When you finish that weapon, the colonel would like to speak with you. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Being singled out by the battalion commander was either very good news or very bad news, and she could not think of anything she had done recently that would warrant either extreme attention. Yes, Sergeant, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm almost finished. She completed the reassembly of her M4 with extra care, double-checking each step to ensure everything was perfect. If she was about to be evaluated by senior officers, she wanted her work to be flawless. Her hands were steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her body. Marcus gave her an encouraging nod as she stood up from the table. Jennifer looked worried, clearly concerned that Sarah might be in some kind of trouble. But Sarah forced herself to remain calm and professional as she walked toward where Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was waiting. Private First Class Rodriguez reporting as requested, sir, she said, coming to attention and rendering a crisp salute. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison returned the salute and studied her for a moment before speaking. His expression was neutral, giving no indication of whether this meeting was positive or negative. Rodriguez, I understand you have an excellent record in this unit, he began. Sergeant Williams speaks very highly of your technical skills and leadership potential. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, maintaining her position of attention. I also understand that you recently received the call sign Eagle 7 during our last field exercise. That's quite an honor for a soldier at your experience level. Sarah felt a surge of pride at the recognition, but she kept her expression composed. Yes, sir. I was honored to receive that designation. One of the unknown officers stepped forward slightly. He was a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail about Sarah's appearance and demeanor. His uniform bore the insignia of a full colonel, making him the highest-ranking officer she had ever spoken with directly. Rodriguez, have you ever considered applying for specialized training or advanced assignments? The colonel asked. This was definitely not a routine question. Sarah sensed that her answer could have significant implications for her future, but she was not sure what the right response would be. She decided to answer honestly. I'm always interested in opportunities to serve more effectively, sir. If there are training programs or assignments that would make me a better soldier, I would be honored to be considered. The colonel nodded and made a note on his tablet. What would you say is your greatest strength as a soldier? Sarah thought for a moment before answering. This was clearly some kind of evaluation, and she wanted to be truthful while also presenting herself in the best possible light. I think my greatest strength is reliability, sir. My squad mates and leaders know that I will complete any assigned task to the best of my ability, regardless of how difficult or unpleasant it might be. And your greatest weakness? This was a more challenging question. Sarah knew that claiming not to have any weaknesses would sound arrogant and dishonest. But she also did not want to highlight flaws that would disqualify her from whatever opportunity was being discussed. I sometimes have trouble delegating tasks to others, sir. I tend to want to do everything myself rather than trusting others to meet my standards. I'm working on becoming a better leader by learning to guide and support other soldiers rather than just doing their work for them." The colonel smiled slightly, the first change in his expression since the conversation began.
That's an honest answer and shows good self-awareness.
Leadership skills can be developed, but integrity and work ethic are harder to teach.
Lieutenant Colonel Harrison spoke again.
"Rodriguez, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that cannot be discussed with anyone outside this room.
Do you understand?"
Sarah felt her mouth go dry. Classified information meant that this conversation was about something much more significant than she had initially realized.
"Yes, sir. I understand. We're forming a special task force for an overseas mission that will require soldiers with exceptional technical skills and proven reliability.
The mission involves working with Allied forces in a high-security environment where attention to detail and absolute trustworthiness are essential."
Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information.
A special mission overseas with Allied forces, this was the kind of opportunity that could define a military career. But it also meant leaving behind everything familiar and taking on responsibilities that would be much more demanding than her current duties.
"The selection process is extremely rigorous," the colonel added.
Physical fitness, psychological evaluation, security clearance investigation, and specialized training that will last several months.
Most candidates do not successfully complete the program.
If selected, you would be promoted to specialist immediately and assigned to a classified unit that reports directly to higher headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison continued. The mission duration would be approximately 18 months, with limited contact with family and friends during that time.
Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered.
This was far beyond anything she had imagined when she walked into the maintenance room that morning. But she also felt a surge of excitement at the possibility of serving at such a high level. "I'm honored to be considered for this opportunity, sir," she said carefully.
"May I ask what would be expected of me if I were selected?" The colonel exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Colonel Harrison before answering.
"Your primary role would be as a communications specialist and cultural liaison, working with international partners to coordinate joint operations. You would be responsible for maintaining classified communication equipment and ensuring secure information flow between Allied units." This was exactly the kind of work that appealed to Sarah's technical interests and desire to serve in a meaningful capacity. Working with Allied forces would provide opportunities to learn about different military cultures and approaches to solving problems. "The mission location is in Eastern Europe," the colonel continued. "You would be working in a region where tensions are high and the political situation is complex. The work is important, but it is also potentially dangerous." Sarah thought about her mother and brother back in New Mexico. Elena would be terrified if she knew that Sarah was being considered for a dangerous overseas assignment. But Sarah also knew that this was exactly the kind of mission her father would have been proud to undertake. "Sir, I would be honored to serve wherever my country needs me," she said firmly. "If you believe I have the skills and qualifications for this mission, I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to complete the selection process." The colonel made another note on his tablet and then looked directly at Sarah.
"The initial screening process will begin next week.
You will be temporarily assigned to a classified training facility for evaluation. If you successfully complete the first phase, you will continue with advanced training and security clearance processing."
Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stepped forward.
"Rodriguez, I want you to understand that accepting this opportunity means leaving your current unit and potentially changing the entire trajectory of your military career. This is not a decision to make lightly." Sarah appreciated his concern for her understanding of the implications. But, in her heart, she already knew what her answer would be. This was the kind of opportunity that her father had always encouraged her to pursue, a chance to serve at the highest level and make a real difference in the world. "I understand the significance of this decision, sir. But I believe this is exactly why I joined the military, to serve my country in whatever capacity would be most valuable." The colonel nodded approvingly.
"Very good. Report to Building A at 0800 hours on Monday morning. Bring only essential personal items, everything else you need will be provided. You will be briefed on additional details at that time.
Yes, sir, Sarah replied, fighting to keep the excitement out of her voice. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison said as the conversation concluded, this opportunity came to you because of your exceptional performance and the strong recommendation of your immediate supervisors. Don't let that go to your head, but do let it give you confidence that you belong in this program.
Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you.
The officers moved on to speak with other soldiers, leaving Sarah to return to her table where Marcus and Jennifer were waiting with obvious curiosity. But she could not tell them anything about what had just occurred. The classification restrictions meant that this conversation would have to remain her secret.
What was that about? Marcus asked immediately.
Just routine questions about my performance and career goals, Sarah replied, trying to sound casual.
Nothing major.
But, inside, Sarah felt anything but casual. In less than 10 minutes, her entire future had changed. She was about to embark on the most challenging and potentially rewarding experience of her military career, and she could not tell anyone about it. As she finished organizing her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave the maintenance room, Sarah looked around at the familiar environment one last time. Next week, she would begin a journey that would take her far from this comfortable routine and into a world of greater responsibility and risk. She thought about her father's dog tags in her pocket and silently promised him that she would make him proud. This was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of having, and Sarah was determined to prove herself worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. The maintenance room suddenly felt different, not like the end of another routine session, but like the conclusion of one chapter of her life and the beginning of something entirely new. Sarah Rodriguez, call sign Eagle 7, was about to discover just how far her wings could carry her. 6 months later, Sarah stood in another maintenance room, but this one was located in a classified facility outside Prague, Czech Republic. The room was smaller than the one at Fort Carson, with concrete walls and no windows. The fluorescent lights hummed with a different frequency, and the smell of gun oil mixed with the dampness that seemed to permeate all Eastern European military buildings. She was no longer Private First Class Rodriguez. The name tape on her uniform now read SGT Rodriguez, and her sleeve bore the chevrons of a sergeant, a promotion that had come with successfully completing the most demanding training program of her military career. But, more significantly, she was no longer just maintaining her personal weapon. As the senior communications specialist for Joint Task Force Phoenix, Sarah was responsible for maintaining the sophisticated encrypted radio systems that connected American, Polish, Czech, and British forces operating throughout the region. The equipment spread across the tables before her was far more complex than anything she had worked with at Fort Carson. Digital radios with frequency hopping technology, satellite communication terminals, and encryption devices that required special clearances just to touch. Each piece represented millions of dollars of advanced technology and the security of ongoing operations. Sarah worked with the methodical precision that had become her trademark, but her hands moved with the confidence that came from 6 months of intensive training and 3 months of real-world application. She had learned to maintain equipment that could mean the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death for soldiers operating in hostile territory. The training facility in Virginia had been unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. For 12 weeks, she had been pushed to her physical and mental limits by instructors who were among the most experienced special operations personnel in the military. The dropout rate exceeded 70%, with candidates leaving the program for reasons ranging from inability to handle the physical demands to failure of psychological evaluation. Sarah had struggled during the first few weeks, particularly with the advanced technical training that required her to learn entirely new systems and procedures. The pace was relentless: 16-hour days of classroom instruction, hands-on training, physical conditioning, and practical exercises that simulated real-world crisis scenarios. But she had persevered, drawing on the discipline and determination that military life had instilled in her. When other candidates complained about the demands or questioned whether the training was worth the effort, Sarah reminded herself of her father's sacrifice and her commitment to serve at the highest level possible. The psychological evaluation had been particularly challenging. military psychologists had probed every aspect of her background, personality, and mental resilience. They wanted to ensure that soldiers selected for classified missions could handle isolation, stress, and moral complexity without breaking down or compromising security. Sarah had answered their questions honestly, even when honesty revealed vulnerabilities or uncertainties. She had learned that the evaluators were not looking for perfection, they were looking for self-awareness, emotional stability, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. The security clearance investigation had taken months and involved interviews with everyone from her high school teachers to neighbors in her childhood neighborhood. Investigators had examined her financial records, travel history, and personal relationships with microscopic attention to detail. During that process, Sarah had worried constantly that some minor mistake or forgotten detail from her past would disqualify her from the program. But the investigation had concluded that she met the highest standards for trustworthiness and reliability required for access to classified information. The final phase of training had taken place at various locations across the United States and Europe, where Sarah had learned to operate in different cultural environments and work effectively with international partners. She had studied the history and politics of Eastern Europe, learned basic phrases in several languages, and practiced the diplomatic skills necessary for successful coalition operations. Now, sitting in this maintenance room in Prague, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since the day 6 months ago when she had been selected for the program. She was no longer the uncertain young soldier who had needed help understanding complex equipment. She had become someone that others looked to for guidance and expertise. The mission itself had exceeded her expectations in both its importance and its complexity. Joint Task Force Phoenix was conducting counterintelligence operations designed to identify and disrupt foreign espionage activities targeting NATO allies. Sarah's role involved maintaining the secure communication networks that allowed information sharing between multiple intelligence agencies and military units. The work required absolute precision and attention to detail. A single mistake in configuring encryption settings could compromise ongoing operations or put intelligence sources at risk. Sarah had learned to double and triple check every procedure, knowing that the consequences of error extended far beyond herself. But the most challenging aspect of the mission had been the isolation. As Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had warned her, contact with family and friends was severely limited. Sarah was allowed one 10-minute phone call per week with her mother, and those calls were monitored for security purposes. Elena had been devastated when Sarah had called to explain that she was being assigned to a classified mission overseas. Even though Sarah could not provide details about the location or nature of her work, her mother had understood immediately that this assignment involved significant dangers. "Mija, please be careful," Elena had pleaded during their last conversation. "I know your father would be proud of you, but he would also want you to come home safely." Sarah had promised to be as careful as possible while still fulfilling her duties. But they both knew that military service sometimes required accepting risks that could not be completely mitigated. It was part of the sacrifice that military families made in service to their country. Carlos had been more supportive of Sarah's assignment, partly because he was planning to enlist in the military himself after graduating from college. He had asked detailed questions about her training and preparation, though Sarah could only provide general information due to security restrictions. "I want to follow in your footsteps," he had told her. "You and Papa have shown me what it means to serve something bigger than yourself." The door to the maintenance room opened, and Captain Mitchell entered carrying a classified message folder. Captain Mitchell was the task force intelligence officer, a woman in her early 30s who had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq before being assigned to the European theater. "Rodriguez, we need to reconfigure the satellite terminal for emergency traffic," she said, setting the folder on Sarah's table. "Priority 1 message traffic is expected within the hour." Sarah immediately stopped her routine maintenance work and focused on the satellite communication terminal. Priority 1 traffic meant that something significant was happening that required immediate attention from senior leaders. Her job was to ensure that the equipment was functioning perfectly when that traffic arrived. She powered up the terminal and ran through the standard diagnostic procedures, checking signal strength, encryption status, and network connectivity. Everything appeared to be functioning normally, but Sarah performed additional checks to verify that all systems were operating at optimal levels.
"Terminal is fully operational, ma'am," Sarah reported. "Signal strength is excellent, and all encryption modules are functioning properly." Captain Mitchell nodded approvingly. Over the past 3 months, she had learned to rely on Sarah's technical expertise and attention to detail. The young sergeant had never failed to deliver when critical communications were needed. "Outstanding. Monitor the terminal closely over the next few hours. If we lose connectivity during the priority traffic window, it could impact operations across the entire theater." Sarah understood the significance of the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. Communications failures during critical operations could result in poor coordination, missed opportunities, or even casualties among friendly forces. Her technical skills had become a vital component of mission success. As Captain Mitchell left the maintenance room, Sarah returned to her work with renewed focus. She completed the routine maintenance on the other radio systems quickly but thoroughly, ensuring that all equipment would be ready if needed for backup communications. The satellite terminal remained her primary concern. She monitored its status constantly while working on other tasks, watching for any signs of degraded performance or potential problems. The equipment was remarkably sophisticated and generally reliable, but Sarah had learned that electronics could fail without warning, especially in the demanding environments where military forces operated. At 1,400 hours, the priority traffic began arriving. Sarah watched as encrypted messages flowed through the terminal, their contents invisible to her but their importance evident from the activity they generated throughout the facility. Officers moved quickly through the hallways, and she could hear urgent conversations taking place in nearby offices. The terminal performed flawlessly throughout the afternoon, handling dozens of high-priority messages without any interruptions or technical problems. Sarah felt a sense of professional satisfaction knowing that her careful maintenance work had contributed to the smooth flow of critical information. As evening approached, Sarah began to think about the phone call she was scheduled to make to her mother that night. It would be their first conversation in 2 weeks, and she knew Elena would be anxious to hear her voice and receive reassurance that she was safe. But Sarah could not tell her mother about the intensity and importance of the work she was doing. She could not explain that her technical skills were helping to protect American interests and Allied security across an entire geographic region. The classification restrictions meant that her family would never fully understand the significance of her contribution to national security. This was perhaps the most difficult aspect of her current assignment. Sarah took tremendous pride in her work and wanted to share that pride with the people she loved most. But the nature of classified operations required personal sacrifice that extended beyond physical separation to include emotional isolation. At 1800 hours, Sarah completed her maintenance duties and secured all equipment according to established procedures. Every piece of classified equipment had to be properly shut down and locked in approved storage containers when not in use. The security protocols were extensive and time-consuming, but absolutely essential for protecting sensitive technology and information. As she prepared to leave the maintenance room, Sarah paused to look at the equipment she had spent the day caring for. These sophisticated machines represented the cutting edge of military communications technology, but they were also tools that connected her to something much larger than herself. Through these radios and terminals, she was linked to intelligence analysts in Washington, military commanders throughout Europe, and soldiers in the field who depended on reliable communications for their safety and effectiveness. Her work in this small, windowless room had implications that extended around the world. Sarah thought about the maintenance room at Fort Carson where this journey had begun. 6 months ago, she had been a young soldier cleaning her personal weapon and dreaming of opportunities to serve at a higher level. Now she was a specialist in classified communications, entrusted with responsibilities that few soldiers ever had the chance to undertake. The transformation had required enormous personal sacrifice and had challenged her in ways she could never have imagined. But Sarah knew that she had found her calling in this demanding and important work. She had become the kind of soldier her father would have been proud to serve alongside. As she walked through the corridors of the classified facility toward her living quarters, Sarah carried with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was making a difference in the world.
She was no longer just maintaining her weapon, she was maintaining the technological lifelines that protected freedom and security for millions of people. The phone call with her mother would be brief and carefully restricted in its content. But Sarah would carry into that conversation the confidence that came from knowing she was serving her country with honor and distinction at the highest levels of military responsibility. In the maintenance room at Fort Carson, she had been Eagle 7, a promising young soldier with potential for future leadership. Here in Prague, she had become something more, a guardian of the invisible networks that connected free nations in their common defense against those who would threaten their security and way of life. The general might call her call sign again someday, but now she would answer with the voice of experience, expertise, and absolute confidence in her ability to serve. The room would not go silent in surprise, it would listen with respect for a soldier who had proven herself worthy of the most challenging missions her country could offer. Sarah Rodriguez had found her place in the world, and it was exactly where she belonged, in service to something greater than herself, maintaining not just weapons but the very foundations of international security and cooperation. The young woman who had cleaned her rifle with such care had become a professional warrior, and the transformation was complete.